Austin, San Antonio. This is a two-part panel discussion regarding CPG. My name is Tyler Davis. I'm the Vice President of ACG Austin, San Antonio's membership committee. So it was great to see you all. Thank you all for joining. A quick housekeeping item. You've been automatically muted, but please submit questions for our panelists through the chat button below. There will also be a question throughout and a QA at the end of the panel discussion. And then at the end of the event, and it will be around 1 p.m., we will have a networking breakout option, which will last for about 30 minutes. You will be able to unmute yourself once we move into the breakout room. So before we get started, I wanted to be sure to thank our annual chapter sponsors at the Diamond level, Weaver, Insperity, and Dykema. And I believe we have a few of those representatives on the call. Thanks for joining. And at the Platinum level, it's HireBetter. Thank you all for your ongoing support and partnership. And we appreciate all that you've done for ACG Austin, San Antonio. All right, so let's start the event. As I mentioned, this is the first of a two-part panel discussion discussing all things CPG. So today's event is titled CPG, The New Landscape, and it's with 3 prominent CPG CEOs. The second event is going to be next Wednesday, June 10th, at the same time, titled The Future of CPG Investing, and it's with a stellar panel of Badr Alam of Kavu Ventures, Chris Schonk of ATX Venture Partners, and Scott Collier of Whole Foods Investing. Both of these CPG panel discussions will be moderated by Kurt Wilkin. Kurt has a very unique perspective on the CPG space. As he is the CEO of HireBetter, which is a strategic talent partner for many CPG companies. Kurt is also a longtime mentor in SKU, which is Austin's stellar CPG incubator program. And Kurt is also the founder of Bee Caves Capital, which invests in many CPG companies. So in short, Kurt is passionate about all things CPG. So let's get started. Kurt, I will let you introduce our illustrious panelists. So take it away, Kurt.
Awesome. Thank you, Tyler. And thanks so much for the kind introduction and the kind words. Tyler, I'm damn glad to be here, and I'm glad to be hosting 3 really good friends from Austin. Each of them are CPG champions in their own right. And thank you, ACG, for providing a venue for us to talk about this new landscape of CPG. Our goal this afternoon is to pull back the curtain a little bit, let you inside the minds of 3 entrepreneurs who've all had tremendous success, but if they're honest, they've all had their own share of challenges. So hopefully we'll get into a little bit of both. We'll provide some stories from the front lines, what it's like to grow a CPG company in 2020, and really what is that new landscape. We're not just going to focus on the COVID story because that's a lot of what 2020 has been about. But there's other things that we need to talk about before we dive into 2020. And what I mean by that is, obviously, for the past 12 weeks, our front lines have related to the COVID pandemic pretty much 24/7. But over the past few days, just as we were starting to open back up, we were hit with even more uncertainty as horrific examples of police brutality were followed by mass protests focused on racial inequality, particularly towards African Americans. We're going to continue this conversation as things unfold, but we're not going to dive deep into that today. That's not what we're going to talk about today. Here's my suggestion in the meantime, though, and that is connect with others. People are scared. People are frustrated. Reach out to friends, family, and colleagues. Check on them, see how they're feeling, see how they're doing. This is an unsettling time for everyone, and tensions are high. Most people will appreciate the reach out, and you'll be surprised at what you'll learn. So let's get on to our panelists. Gentlemen, first of all, thank you for being here. I know most of us are Zoomed out, and I realize you're likely in back-to-back meetings as well, so thank you for your valuable time. Next, what I'll do is I'll briefly introduce each of you, and then I'll tee up a question for you to answer about 2020. This should provide us an opportunity to learn a little bit more about your story before we dive into Q&A. So let's start with Scott Jensen. Scott is a founder and CEO of Rhythm Superfoods, which is not only a better for you snack food, but he's also a mentor at SKU, and he's a former founder of Stubbs barbecue sauce, which he had a successful exit to McCormick. And Scott, I wasn't going to talk about your education, but I think I have to. I think you might be overeducated, by the way. Scott has 2 undergrads from SMU, psychology and communication. He also has an MBA from NYU. So Scott, thanks for joining us. Next, let's go to Mason Arnold. Mason is founder and CEO of Cece's Veggie Co. I've known Mason for a long time through some of his ups and downs. Mason went to Texas, has a chemical engineering degree. He's been an entrepreneur or helping entrepreneurs ever since. Previously, he was founder and CEO of Greenling, where he learned a lot of valuable lessons, both good and bad. Then in 2015, he founded Cece's. Timing was great because of paleo and vegan diets on the rise. And he uses engineering background to really find a better way to spiralize vegetables into a pasta-like product. And Cece's has been on a rocket ship ever since. And then last but not least, Ben Ponder. Ben is co-founder and CEO of Ponder Foods, as well as Titanium CPG Insurance, among many other projects. I've been fortunate enough to know Ben since he moved to Austin in 2014. Ben went to my alma mater, the University of Arkansas, for his undergrad and master's degree, and he also may be overeducated. He's got a PhD from Northwestern, but Ben, I'm not going to call you doctor. I hope that's okay.
Nobody does.
He was CEO of SKU when he first moved to Austin, and then ultimately was COO of Cece Family Foods, which is an Austin CPG unicorn most of you have heard about. Ben brings a slightly different perspective to this conversation because in addition to his brand building experience, he now runs a co-packing facility, which is a key relationship for many early stage CPG brands. So there's the background. Before we go on, I'd like to remind everyone to send us questions using the comment feature of Zoom. We'll get to as many as we can. All right, now to the real story. Let's start with Scott. Scott, I'd like each of you to answer this question, but we'll start with Scott. When you came into 2020, you had a vision for what the year was going to look like. We sit here on June 3rd. Things probably look a lot different than you expected. Tell us a little bit about your 2020 story.
Well, we were, our forecast for 2020 was absolute certainty of how it was going to come through. We sell to several different channels. My biggest growth area is what we would call out of home. We sell small snack bags to convenience stores through distributors, airports, schools, business micro markets where employees go and get free snacks and things like that. It's not a massive part of our business, but it's the fastest growing. And in literally like 2 to 3 weeks, that entire channel just evaporated. There's no one driving, so no one's going to convenience stores. There's no one flying, so you're not selling any bags at the airport. There's no one in universities or schools, so you're not selling anything anywhere. The other channels that we sell in, the grocery, conventional and natural grocery, have held on relatively well, although we've had a couple of fluctuations with some retailers that just are changing the cadence of what products they were bringing in. And then on the box store side, we've done exceptionally well. But the biggest thing for us is we've taken over a pretty large manufacturing facility in Mexico, and with 192 employees. So in addition to the 25 employees at our previous production facility in Mexico, I'm now very worried about COVID-19 as it pertains to the employees down there, which may not have the same medical resources as we do up here.
Wow, thank you for that, Scott. Well, let's shift to Mason, and we're going to dig into most of those things you just talked about, by the way, Scott. Mason, same question. I can tee it up for you again if you'd like.
I remember it. So the 2020 story for me, I feel like, it's the same. We all had lots of plans. They weren't coming. But for me, January, I was actually freaking out about COVID-19. I had recently flown through both Seattle and San Jose, and they both had early cases that went through those airports. And I was in SJC late January, and I looked around and realized 30 to 40% of the entire airport had masks on. I was like, wait a minute, I need to go look into this and see what's going on. And so seeing the exponential numbers over in Asia and the fact that it was could be contagious for over a week before people show symptoms, to me, it was a recipe for a really bad scene. And by February, I was tracking the numbers daily for a month. And by February, people started to say I was looking pretty crazy. And so I kind of stopped talking about it and was just like, oh, I guess we'll probably be fine. you know, and then a month later it absolutely blew up. And for us in the fresh channel, it was just chaos. Their, you know, produce was up, you know, I think it's like mid-March to mid-April is up 40 to 50%, but it was potatoes and onions and not value-added vegetable products. And several retailers, key retailers, just dropped us. We're like, we can't even keep potatoes on the shelf. So we're not stocking the salad greens and value-added vegetables at all. And then, but then others, we were kind of going gangbuster. And so it was just a crazy chaos for us for a couple of months. And then as we've settled into, or the new normal has started to emerge, you know, we're slowly recovering from where we were, but all of our conversations are about digital shelf and how do we perform with home delivery services and things like that. So it's been a pretty crazy shift in conversation around our facility.
Well, I'd love to ask each of you about shifts you've made in your business model as we go. But let's go to Ben. Ben, same question for you, 2020. What's it look like?
Yeah, so I bought a manufacturing facility in Dallas in 2019, mid-2019. And, you know, anytime you purchase a new business or try to scale it up, it takes a little while to kind of sort things out. And so I felt like we were really turning the corner. And you know, to Scott's point, it's like, all right, we have a pretty clear idea of what we need to do and how things need to go. And then obviously chaos ensued. And I think one thing that is important to note is that, like, business in general doesn't do well with uncertainty. You can see that in stock markets and other things like that. And so for CPG, certain subsectors in CPG, pantry staples. So we make soup, sauces, dips, and dressings, and now we make some other baked products, energy bars, etc. But on some level, and I think this was covered a lot in the news, your kind of Campbell soups of the world were doing great, right? Because they're just sort of reflexive, like, let's stock up and get, you know, cases and cases of this stuff. Although that's a little false, because people stock up and then they go, I really don't enjoy this Campbell soup that much, so they don't actually eat it. But so we work with a lot of emerging and challenger brands that were, you know, sometimes had tremendous upticks in volume, but really the supply chain writ large became really unpredictable. And so your ingredients, your packaging, and really even the distributors and their ability to fulfill orders to retailers got very dicey. And normally the smaller to, you know, kind of challenger brands are the ones that suffer the most from that unpredictability. So what we saw is, you know, we have about 100,000 square foot facility in Dallas with over 80 employees, and we had gone to 2 shifts. The facility prior had only ever been sort of a single shift facility, and have been ramping up for a lot of growth. And so we're just trying to stay nimble. I will say this, that when you're in the food manufacturing space, and I think hopefully for those of you who aren't in the food business, this will bring you some comfort, that the COVID crisis was not particularly shocking to us. It required sort of an extra level of vigilance. But what we do every day is we like constantly are checking and testing microbiological activity and viruses and all this sort of stuff. So not to say that it was, it definitely wasn't like, oh, this is no big deal, but it was something that we just in the normal course of business are focused on and prepared for. So we, obviously started temp checking all of our employees whenever they came in the door, and adding, goodness knows how much hand sanitizer and all the extra things that you would have done anyway. But really, fighting against bacteria and viral infections and things like that is something that we have to pay attention to every day, whether there's a global pandemic or not.
That is, that does make us feel better, I'm sure. So the follow-up question that I want to ask each of you guys, I know all of you are in the fresh produce business and you take pride in having the freshest produce that you can have. COVID's obviously had an impact, as you said, on your supply chain. How have you managed the past 12 weeks? And I'll start with Mason. How have you managed the last 12 weeks with your supply chain?
Well, for the fresh food industry, there was not a ton of disruption. When he started, the administration started talking about closing down the Mexican border, that's when we started to get a little worried, but it didn't happen for the trucks that were carrying produce. So generally, it's been from a raw product perspective, it's been okay. Now, the trucking industry definitely got thrown for a loop. Lanes completely changed. Drivers, some weren't comfortable going into facilities. So there were all kinds of, call it, smaller problems associated with it. But for the most part, the fresh food industry just kind of kept on trucking.
No pun intended.
Yep.
All right, Ben, your story is slightly different. Obviously, you're producing other people's products, but what have you seen with regard to supply chain?
Well, yeah, so we actually process. One thing we take great pride in is that we make things as fresh as possible. Most of our stuff is kettle cooked or something along those lines. So we aren't having to deal with the same issues that Mason or Scott do in terms of, we have slightly different manufacturing processes. But I would say that the number one area where our supply chain was disrupted a bit actually related to packaging. So what, if you're thinking about, again, whether it's glass, plastic, film, whatever you package your product in, that's a very distributed global supply chain. And, we'll take glass, for instance. There are glass suppliers in Italy, which was shut down for a long time. There are glass suppliers. Obviously, the largest is mainland China, which had all kinds of issues related to exports and things like that. And so we had to be nimble and creative to source alternative suppliers, where, again, it was always a moving target, because the area that's locked down today might be the area that's opened up in 2 weeks, and then the area that's opened up might be locked down in 2 weeks.
You had a story when I talked to you last week about the impact that the restaurant industry had on your industry. Do you care to expand?
Oh, absolutely. So, like as a co-packer, contract packer, contract manufacturer, different terms for the business. We manufacture for a lot of different clients. So certainly restaurants, food service, but as well as grocery stores, like private label type stuff or branded products. And one of the things, when all of the restaurants and really a lot of the institutional, like colleges, schools, shut down, you had all of the Cisco's, US Foods, Benny Keith's of the world, the big food service distributors, kind of got shut down too. And then at the same time, simultaneously, you had the UNFIs and KHEs of the world that were focused more on natural or grocery stores. They were inundated with supply issues and orders. And so a lot of where you were seeing products that weren't actually on the shelves at grocery stores, it wasn't that people couldn't make them, and it wasn't that they weren't even out there. They couldn't get to the store because the way that the U.S. supply chain is set up, we as consumers roughly consume about 50% of our, Americans do, 50% of the food outside the home in restaurants and cafes, and 50% inside. Overnight, effectively, you had 50% of that supply that was, again, very finely tuned machine dedicated to serving all these restaurants evaporated. And it's a very difficult, sort of like steering, an ocean liner a little bit to try to get that supply going in a different direction.
Scott, you've got an added complication in that you do all of your production in Mexico. Do you care to share a little bit about your war story?
Yeah, well, I would say one of the things about how the coronavirus has affected, like we moved our production down to Mexico because almost everything we make is pulling something out of the ground, and within 48 hours we're processing it and drying it or putting it in a bag with with shelf life, and so being very close to the organic supply of our produce is very important. So we do business basically with 4 organic family farms that are within an hour to 2 hours of our processing facility. each one of those are delivering a ton of product fresh up to the United States to the retailers you go to, whether it's Walmart or Whole Foods. So depending on what their relationships were, they're getting 10 to 40% of their business on the food service side, selling their organic produce to the US. And that evaporated because many of them had business with US Foods and with Cisco's. So us being someone that turns it into a snack, we had no problems whatsoever. And so for us, it was a great time. We're not happy about the paneling of the business of everyone else, because we had business in the out of home, as I said earlier, and it just evaporated almost overnight. And to follow up with one thing that Ben is talking about, people don't understand, is when you put in a manufacturing plant and it's geared towards retail business to sell something to an HEB or a Whole Foods, there's a whole plant set up to make things in a certain size. Food service, US Foods, Cisco, restaurants, they may be buying 50-pound bags of potatoes or 5-gallon jugs of milk. And whatever plant was processing those, no one wants to buy those sizes at a retail operation. So although we have this incredibly robust distribution and retail system, the type of items and packaging that a Cisco or US Foods delivers around to restaurants is not what someone at an HEB is going to buy. And you can't just snap your fingers overnight and suddenly that 5-gallon production line of milk or some liquid is suddenly putting it in 16-ounce bottles. That the capacity just wasn't there. So that's a little bit of the catch up that many of the major CPG companies just kind of dialed things up. They were able to increase 10-15%, but the transportation part of it was a big problem here in the US too, because those warehouses and distributors only have so much excess capacity. If you were operating with 50% excess capacity, you would go out of business. So they typically only have 10-15% of excess capacity, and they can't just double their orders overnight. So any slowness that you see and people are, oh, we're never gonna have chicken, or we're not gonna have flour, I can't get pasta. It's there, it's coming, but it just can't happen overnight.
That's a good lesson for all of us. I know I expect everybody to be able to snap their fingers and make things happen, but it rarely works that way.
Yeah.
Hey, so I want to remind everybody, if use the chat box and ask questions of these guys. I know since this is an ACG audience, I'm sure that investing and buying and selling is a big part of what you might be interested in. We are going to ask some questions about capital raising during a pandemic, so we'll get to that. But please ask your questions in the chat box. So I'm going to start with Ben on this next one, and then we'll go from there. So Ben, in these CEO forums that I'm running, we talk a lot about pivoting and going on the offensive and trying to come out of this stronger than before. What are some of the things that you are either doing with Ponder Foods or Titanium, or maybe that you're seeing with some of the companies that you're involved as an advisor or an investor?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, you either, in a time like this, you're either just going to get pummeled, or you're gonna be on the balls of your feet and do something about it. So we definitely have tried to take the latter position. So at Ponder Foods, I would say there's a couple of things that we had plans to do, but that the COVID crisis has probably accelerated some of those things. So one of those is building out a robust e-commerce direct-to-consumer offering that enables us to, as I mentioned before, we manufacture for a variety of other brands that you might be able to purchase in your favorite grocery store. But we also have, I really kind of got into the manufacturing thing somewhat by accident, really out of necessity. I'm a marketing and branding guy originally, and so I love building brands. And so we had always planned on building some portfolio brands. That this, I think, circumstance has accelerated the timeline for some of those things. And then also, again, the ability to connect directly with consumers. So we've started this direct-to-consumer platform that we call Mercado Avocado, that is specifically that's pretty rudimentary right now, but over time will be a more robust platform offering for us. And then one other thing that I do want to point out, I think as an entrepreneur, you have to be an optimist. It's sort of like in our genetic code. but at the same time, you also have to traffic in reality. And I think that the reality of the times we live in, particularly the coronavirus COVID crisis, this is going to, in my estimation, this is going to last for a while, right? So whether it's related to the discovery and dissemination of a vaccine or whatever the solutions are, the world has fundamentally shifted. And so one thing that we've tried to do in response to the way that the world has shifted is to not only develop products that are value added that frankly in a lot of natural and organic settings can be premium priced. They're almost sort of affordable luxury goods in some respects. We still make those and we'll still continue to spin up brands around some of those things, but we also have accelerated our product development timelines around a handful of value, sort of more value oriented brand options, just because it is very likely, you know, as you see the unemployment figures, and I feel like even those are lagging indicators. This is much deeper than anything that happened in 2008, 2009, and it's really endemic to the economy. And so we want to be well positioned so that we're providing really high quality, delicious food products at really attainable price points.
I think that's good feedback and good advice for everybody on this call, no matter what their industry is, to look for other ways to serve their customers and clients besides the premium goods that they've had before. So thank you for that, Ben. Scott, I'll ask you the same question. What are you seeing or doing either with Rhythm or some of the companies you're involved in?
Yeah, to pile on with what Ben said in the beginning of his answer, you've got to be on the balls of your feet, right? So one of the things that's happening for us right now is a pretty tremendous growth on our online business. And for us, it's really Amazon. And, you know, we're doing pretty well on Amazon. Let's just say we're doing about $50,000 to $100,000 a month, less than 2% of our sales. So as last year's, you know, planning sessions came about, we're like, we really need to be upwards of 5 to 10% online direct to consumer. So we started the process of planning for that and what was the infrastructure of both human resources, capital resources, and external resources that it was going to take to do that, because we're kind of a bricks and mortar seller of products. What you do for online selling is it's a different package that you're shipping than you would necessarily ship a case to a store. So there's a whole kitting, creating a kit that's going to be shipped in an efficient way. So we've gone through the early process that's rather slow and methodic. The orders tripled and quadrupled in March and April. And then we found ourselves a little bit flat-footed, not being able to handle that level of order. And as Ben was also saying, it's a new world order. Like the forcefulness that you now, if you want to stay at home and be safe, you have to learn how to pick up your phone and order from a retailer or from one of the delivery companies. So that's a marketing vehicle in and of itself. Click it and pick it up, or just having someone deliver it or you deliver it. So we've had to quickly amplify that, and we're focusing a lot of resources and time right now so that we're not flat-footed. Particularly if the COVID-19 expresses itself even bigger in the fall and the winter, like is predicted by some experts. But it's going to be a big part of our business going forward, and not just a 3 or 4% part of our business. We expect to be upwards of 10% by the end of this year, and seeking 15 to 20% the following year, because people are not necessarily going to go back. Some will go back to shopping in a store, but once you find your groove and how you pick up your app and you know how to shop for your favorite store, it's a habit that's not necessarily going to go back to normal. So you'll see the grocery side of that grow and stay. It may not stay as high as it is right now. People will come back to the stores, but it's going to be a bigger part of everyone's business.
Well, I think what this has done is it made things happen much faster, both good and bad in a lot of ways. And I think you just described that. So Mason, your business is different. You obviously have a very, very fresh product. So I assume you don't sell a ton online. What are some of the pivots that you've seen or some offensive strategies you've done?
Yeah, so we really can't sell online. That is cost prohibitive to ship it overnight. In fact, our #1 product, zucchini spirals, is incredibly sensitive to temperature. And so it comes up probably at least once a month. Someone's like, how do we figure out D2C? And I'm like, we don't. We work around it. We make sure digital shelf is updated. We're integrated with the online shopping platforms, and that we're easy to find there. And so what we have done from a pivot perspective, we had a product development pipeline with different things and seasonal offerings and such that we were kind of working on, and we put everything on hold and we went all in on functional foods and around immunity and gut health and such. And so we're creating a new line of products that are ready to eat, fresh kind of meal replacement products that are immune boosting. And so we want to get that out into the marketplace as quickly as we can to provide those kinds of options. And then to get it in front of people, is driving through social media and other channels to raise awareness so that it can be seen, and making sure that we're shown on the digital shelf, and then just presenting offerings that we think are more relevant in the coming months and year that were not relevant a year ago.
Makes a lot of sense. Speaking of marketing, I'm gonna question just came through the chat box from Susan. With field marketing essentially shut down, how are you getting customers to try your products? And I'll ask you to raise your hand if you want to answer that, or I'll point somebody out. Scotty.
So we had already dialed down some of our field marketing over the last year and a half pretty significantly, because it was a big part of our marketing program. But all the retailers stopped it. And even with some of them, like Costco announced it coming back last week, that they would start doing it. But it's not the same. It's not the same. They're only doing it for those that can provide a sanitized single serve. So you're not going to have people kind of, standing around the little pizza oven waiting for their little piece in a little paper cup. So for us, it's social media and the digital marketing side. We hadn't been strong on the digital marketing because we hadn't been as strong on direct to consumer. But within the next 60 days, our commitment to our board and shareholders and ourselves is to amplify that effort and try to direct people to go into retailers, but also to click in and also order from us directly. So we've kind of turned away from the demoing and the sampling, and we used to do a bunch of outside field events at concerts and vegan and vegetarian gatherings, and they're just not having them anymore. So we pulled back, and it actually gives you like a pause to kind of like reevaluate those. Like, was I spending the money in the right way? Now that I'm not spending it, what's happening to my sales and that I was expecting to happen from that marketing spend? It's also, gives you a lot of reflection, as a lot of the retailers for a couple months didn't want to do deals, didn't want the trade spend, didn't want to put their labor in the store to put stickers and change, to $1 off for this 2-week period of time. So it gives you time to reevaluate, because the wheel kind of stopped for a little bit, and you can kind of look and see, how is it affecting me? And in certain circumstances, it has affected us. We haven't been on promotional. We haven't been on end caps. We haven't had any of those things executed. And in those retailers where that's happened, we've seen a slip in sales.
I like the fact that it's helped you see the bigger picture and find some opportunities that you were ordinarily just going through the day. One thing that I think I just heard, did you say Costco is not doing the free samples anymore? That's the only reason I went to Costco in the past. What's going on?
Yeah, no demos at Costco.
Oh, yeah, they hadn't for the last 3 months, but they just announced they're going to get back into it, but it's going to change a little bit, and it's got to be sanitized in a different way. So you're not going to have the normal, like, people cohabitating around waiting for that chocolate chip cookie to get out of the oven.
I'll Ben, you want to add on to this topic?
Yeah, I think that on some level, that what we're seeing is this is an acceleration of a thing that I think has actually been happening for some time, and that is probably in the 90s and even the aughts. Field marketing was really the #1 way that new brands and new products drove trial or discovery. It's sort of product discovery. How do you everybody's heard of the old legacy brands. If you're a new kid in town and nobody's heard of you, how do you get on people's radar? How do you create brand awareness and that sort of thing? And certainly that still mattered a lot. I know that Mason very effectively, himself as the founder, did tons of demos at Whole Foods Lamar in the early days of Cece's. And so it still works, but I think that particularly in an Instagram world, that social media, that particularly millennials and Gen Z do a lot of their new product discovery through influencers, which aren't necessarily your multi-million follower mega influencers, but the sort of micro and nano influencers. And so that tends to be, and I saw that when we were, so at CFA Family Foods, we experienced some success in terms of just building authentic relationships with people really who were kind of niche influencers and not having really a transactional relationship, but actually truly becoming friends. And so I think that's part of the way the world has shifted now. And now when you take away the prospect of sort of this perceived unsanitary sampling demo thing, you've just got to get creative. And really to Scott's point, I take a very experimental approach to all this. And I'm really, in our business, in any different product, any different brand, any different channel, you're constantly running a bunch of little micro experiments, and you're trying to see what works, because what works in Costco doesn't necessarily work in HEB. What works for Scott's brand doesn't necessarily work for Mason's brand. And there's a lot of nuance there. And then what works in 2020 might not work in 2022, and so you're constantly collecting data and then tweaking, finding the thing that works for you and your brand. And then you try to put more fuel in the tank and do more of that.
Great advice. Mason, would you like to add to that? And you don't have to. We can go to the next question if you don't.
No, I think we covered it.
Awesome. Well, we've got we've gone from marketing to now we have more of a financial question for you guys. And there's some pending legislation about the PPP program expanding from 8 weeks to 24 weeks or even longer, and how we can spend it is the process of being considered by Congress. So the question is, how do you plan to invest your PPP funding if the pending legislation for extended forgiveness is passed? Anyone want to tackle that first?
I will. Just a quick shout out to, I think I saw his name on here, Stephen Borrego of Texas Capital Bank, I think is on the Zoom. He's our banker at Texas Capital Bank, and he's a great guy. And Stephen and the team there have been phenomenal to work with, and have helped us through the PPP process as well. And from our perspective, we're going to use the PPP funds for exactly what they're intended to do, to make sure that in a world of, when you're dealing with a factory situation where labor your supply and demand can be choppy, but people don't necessarily want to have a choppy job, it can actually help levelize and normalize that curve. And so, I think the funds were intended to make sure that people had steady, gainful employment, and that you're able to weather the uncertainty. And so that's really kind of our focus.
Make sure Scott.
I would just add to that the same thing. It's when you have something happen so dire that no one is wanting to see you. We have salespeople, and we've got a strong team of salespeople out around the country. They're regional sales managers and a VP of sales in the Carolinas. No one was seeing anyone and didn't want to see anyone. And honestly, we never had to make that decision about what do you do now that sales has changed completely. And we're establishing ourselves as an online seller now to try to establish this high level of protocol for how you conduct a 30-minute Zoom presentation to a buyer at Kroger or, at any retailer. But because of the PPP money, we didn't have to address that issue, which is I've got a great salesperson that, calls on the out-of-home market, and I don't want to lose her. So it gave us the ability to kind of pass over that issue that everyone was trying to face, like who's being affected. My salespeople can't travel. They can't sit in front of a buyer. They can't go meet with brokers. They can't go into the marketplace. they're busy, but it's a different type of busy. So that's how we're using the PPP money, holding on to the team.
Nice. Mason, would you like to address that or no?
Yeah, I mean, just same here. We're doing it for labor. We've got a facility with a ton of people, and so we were worried about whether we could keep them all in the chaos, and the PPP allowed us to do that. And so I think it, you know, being a few weeks into it at this point, of all the, you know, everyone, there's a lot of conversation about different programs and what the government is or isn't doing, but I feel like that PPP program was the right tool at the right time to really keep the wheels moving through an extremely uncertain time. And so we were extremely appreciative of it, and we feel like it really helped a lot of businesses like ours.
Yeah, Mason, that's a good point. I'll even add to that, the fact that they're considering shifting the rules to make it a longer period is going to be good for a lot of companies who weren't able to spend in a 8-week window and had furloughed staff or what have you. And this is really, I think, the right answer. So good point. Hey, Scott, you were talking about selling and the way you were selling to your clients and customers. One of the biggest questions we get is, how in the hell do I sell virtually? I'm used to going to trade shows. I'm used to going to the buyer's offices. What are you guys seeing as either effective or ineffective ways to sell in today's environment? Scott, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I think we handled that one. This could be a good piece of information for everyone if they haven't done something like this. But there's no more trade shows, and we went to a lot of trade shows. So we have developed a box that arrives at a buyer's office. It hasn't been printed yet. We just kind of finalized the design of it. And it has like a bunch of unique, you open it up, the samples are there, they hang off of the top. There's some vegetables that kind of pop out. If you remember as a kid, you had a pop-out book. So we're trying to create some, you know, unique, interesting way that, you know, it's not just a dirty box that UPS drops off. And it's fun to open it. And we're trying to bring the energy that we had at the trade show into an office and be able to very succinctly in 30 minutes, if they'll allow us more, they'll give us more, but it's hard to hold attention on a Zoom call for an hour if you're a buyer sitting across from a vendor like us. So we're going through the beginning process of training all of our salespeople and going through the motions of how to move through it and get best in class presentation so that we're not sitting there and dragging on, and they're really, really succinct at what they can do. So that was one of the pivots, you know, that we had to do, is try to create that energy into what you could deliver onto someone's desk.
I love it. I like the creativity. Mason or Ben, I'm sure you guys have done some of this as well. What are you guys seeing?
Yeah, kind of in addition to product presentation, when it's coming, we've also been experimenting with asking them to coffee and having coffee delivered to their office. And so we have coffee delivered for everyone and say, meet us for a coffee meeting. And then what I've been doing, which has been, my computer has some settings that apparently they don't trust me to be able to adjust, like where the brightness of it changes depending on, but barring that, I've been playing with green screens and how do we create a Zoom background that is engaging for the customers, and having product sitting right behind available where you can just grab it and bring it to the screen and show them. And then for our sales staff, having particular screen share that they can bring up that immediately shows the customer what we're talking about and what we're doing. And I tend to think we can be more effective in Zoom than than some in-person meetings if it's handled correctly.
Nice. Ben, you're one of the most creative people I know. I know you've got some ideas here. What have you done on this front?
Yeah, well, what we try to, so sales for our business is kind of twofold, right? You've got sales for our co-packing customers who are typically brands or retailers, and then you have sales for our own portfolio brands. So we have slightly different strategies for each, but fundamentally, and this is a mantra I've even alluded to before, to me, I'm really focused on building authentic relationships, and certainly face-to-face is my preferred way of doing that. But when that's not possible, and I think that Scott and Mason have great examples of this, we're trying to do anything that we can within the constraints that we're faced with, to build authentic relationships. So that's I think I probably spend a disproportionate amount of time with customers talking about things that have nothing to do with work, that are how's your family, how are your kids holding up, and that sort of thing. Because I mean, at the end of the day, we're humans. We're all faced with a number of different stresses, and really for me, it's a lot of it is about building trust and credibility. Because if you're somebody like and Scott and Mason are great examples of this, where they have over years developed a reputation in the industry that these guys know what they're talking about. And so you don't have to, that's a really positive signal when you're talking with a buyer or somebody else, in category management or something else. And so that allows you the space to still connect with them. One of the big challenge for our industry, we're talking about edible stuff, is the trade show circuit allows you to really curate and craft an experience that's multi-sensory. I always joke that like the hardest thing in the world to sell is gasoline, because if you ever see it or smell it or God forbid taste it, like something went very, very wrong. But we actually have all of the 5 primary senses at our disposal when we're selling our products. And so in some respects, this current situation has robbed us of those. And so I kind of encourage my team to really think through how can we approximate or simulate that multisensory experience and the authentic relationship aspects that we really strive for.
Awesome. Hey, we have some questions coming through the chat box. Kendall, I'm going to get to yours in just a second. There's one that came in that's very topical of what we just talked about. So this is from Katie. Do you expect any of these creative sales tactics to extend beyond the crisis? Let me keep going. That is, are these just short-term ways to cope in the current moment, or do you think you'll keep using them longer term, perhaps to cut down travel or engage customers in new ways? So I'll take a raise of hand if anybody would like to address this first. Scotty?
I think that many things will stay with us, not 100%. I think there's still, we're going to be back to visiting with people at some point in the next 3 to 12 months. The trade shows, we thought, I think Expo East, Natural Products Expo still thinks they're doing a trade show in October. And Fancy Food Show proactively sent out, if you'd like to cancel your January trade show, you have until August 31st. So some people are getting ahead of it. The fear of people coming together, just because you might be comfortable going somewhere doesn't mean anyone else is comfortable. So I think some of our sales tactics, we're going to realize, not unlike what is not the most valuable use of resources and time, and that maybe my sales team can learn how to be really effective not making that trip. So there's some efficiencies that we can grab onto, but I think I would be remiss if I said that we know exactly what's going to stay with us. We're just testing this stuff out right now, and then I got to make sure that the team is comfortable and good at what they're doing. So we'll see if that sales technique stays with us. The marketing side of it, shifting over to more digital platforms and social media, it was a tidal wave already moving. And so I think you're going to find a lot of people that will stick with a larger part of their budget going online.
Great. We have 10 minutes left. There's a couple of questions in queue. So Mason or Ben, do you have anything to add to that? If not, we'll go to the next question. All right. So this one, so go back to Kendall's question. And it's a topic we talked about a few minutes ago, Ben. She says, Ben talked about accelerating more value-oriented products given the macroeconomic environment and trends. How are the others making their products more affordable for consumers or take cost out of production? Great question. So this is for Scott and Mason. Either one of you guys want to tackle that one?
Go ahead, Mason.
I mean, we're constantly working towards efficiency and how to bring costs out of it. We are a convenience-oriented item, and so we have launched. We were already doing this, and I guess we've accelerated some of this where we moved to a smaller pack size for particular retail channels that are more value oriented. And so we now essentially have 2 lines of 2 different pack sizes, depending on what retailer it is. But being a, you know, value add convenience item, we more kind of anticipate some, you know, fading of some sectors of demand, and we're doubling down on how do we meet the needs of our core customers and bring more items that they find value in.
I'll just add real quickly, Kurt, that you know, we closed a large financing in April, and on the same day purchased the 75,000 square foot manufacturing facility that was making our product under a co-packer relationship. And that was specifically twofold. One is we want to increase our margins at our company. That makes us more valuable, stronger. We can spend more on marketing, but it was also a drive to get the cost of our expensive items lower. We're an indulgent snack because we're taking like a fresh like pound of kale and reducing it down to like 2 ounces by dehydration. So it doesn't look like the greatest value when you look at it, but the value's there. We have to find out how to lower the price. So taking control of our supply chain was deliberate in trying to get our products at a lower price on the shelf in the future.
I'm glad you mentioned the Mexico thing. I know that was a big, hairy deal for you over the past few months. We've got a couple of questions in queue, but I want to stick on this topic for a second because I did promise a little bit of discussion about raising capital during a pandemic. So let me just ask, I know Ben and Scott have been in the middle of this. Mason, I'm not sure if you have or not, but what's it been like to raise money in a worldwide health crisis? And what do you see the future for the next, call it 6 months for raising capital? And I'll look to Scott or Ben first, and Mason, if you want to weigh in. Raise your hand.
Real briefly, you know, we closed our investor that we had been working with for 6 months on the deal, and then we have one other investor that'll be closing hopefully in the next 2 or 3 weeks. If I was just starting a process right now, and I know a half a dozen people that are contemplating it or doing it, they're just finding it very difficult to get traction and to get people to focus. And when they do get people to focus, I think the private equity and venture capital money out there too is nervous and trying to figure out which way is up. If you have something that is of unicorn status and you're just seeing incredible velocity and growth and good margins, you're going to get the attention, and you probably won't get the bruises of what the marketplace is looking at right now. But the old days of being able to freely grab investment for revenue growth is gone for a certain period of time. I don't know how long it's gone, but it's not easy right now to raise that capital. And Ben, you may have another perspective.
No, I agree with that, Scott. So we raised just a little bit of seed capital sort of at the very beginning of the year. And I would say that in general, what you're seeing right now, like you're in, again, some of you are really professional at this. So like venture capital, angel investing is an asset class that is a higher risk asset class. And so when you have risk infused through the marketplace, top to bottom, then sometimes that can seize up some like vehicles for raising money, just because there's so much uncertainty. And I think that's part of what Scott's talking about for people who are beginning a process now, that it can be particularly difficult. And then it's also, I think, you know, what you're seeing is people who have funds to invest are it's a buyer's market on some level too, right? So you can kind of sit around and see who's struggling. And if you have sort of maybe a traditional private equity mindset where you're really trying to make a value purchase, and you think you can, you know, you can either purchase outright or take a majority or minority stake in a business at a lower valuation because things are struggling right now, then I think you're seeing some people with a mindset that they're kind of looking for those sorts of value deals, which is good for the investor, arguably not as good for the entrepreneur. So it's a really difficult time, and you know, my mantra is it's always, if possible, if you can raise money from your customers by selling a good margin product, that's always your best path forward, and everything else is really just rocket fuel.
It's sage advice. Hey, we've got time for one more question, and I want to So Susan, you have a question for Ben specifically. Ben, would you mind, before you log off today, answer her question about barcode and how you monetize that? But Ed's got a good one that's been in there for a little while I want to make sure we cover. The question is, there's been a lot of coverage nationally about the challenges meat packing companies have experienced. I know neither one of you guys have a meat product, but Austin manufacturers have done a great job of preventing similar spreading. Still, have you had any challenges maintaining morale in your workforce? Anybody want to cover that first?
I will. So we actually are a USDA certified facility. So we process meat, and I just want to kind of, I guess, give a shout out to our team in Dallas who've done really a phenomenal job. You can imagine with the uncertainty and the fear that everybody has had over these last several months, and concern for your elderly family members and people who you've got young kids, and the fact that schools are all virtual is really disruptive, and frankly is really a luxury that some of the people probably on the call are able to navigate that probably more easily than a lot of blue collar folks are. And so those are real challenges. And I think that that Brian and our team in Dallas have done really a phenomenal job of kind of keeping everybody encouraged. Obviously, we actually added another break room. A lot of what you see in these these sort of outbreak situations in meat packing plants. If you've ever been to a meat packing plant, it's a pretty ugly operation, and so they're very close in proximity. So what we've tried to do is to really separate in the areas of our plant where people are in close proximity. We're doing our best to try to provide more social distancing there, and then we're doing that even in areas around like the break room. So we added a separate break room so that nobody, like when they sit at the table at lunch, it's only like one person per cafe style table, and they're really spread out in that way. So we're trying to hit it from a few different directions, and then hopefully just try to be encouraging and positive in a lot of uncertainty.
You're on mute, sir.
Mr. Scott, anything quickly you'd like to add?
Yeah, like Ben said, that I actually think that the meat packing clusters, more than anything, expose the extremely poor working conditions that are in those facilities, and how little those companies care about those workers is really what it exposed. We still have extremely close proximity workers. One area but we already, because we have a fresh product and we don't have a kill step, we already have pretty extreme PPE and GMPs around sanitation and preventing the spread. Mostly it's aimed at listeria, but it's effective against COVID as well. Everyone already wears masks, gloves, fully suited up and everything. Where we got kind of lucky was that when early in our history, we took on some of these Congolese refugees, and they're extremely hard workers, and they kept growing and kept growing. And 40% of our facility is Congolese refugees. I think it's actually up to 55% now. And most of them had gone through Ebola. And so our staff takes this very seriously, not only at work, but also on a personal level. And so we feel very lucky for that. We've had to do very little additional education, or we take temperatures and we do the questionnaires when people come in. But once they're in the facility, everyone, handles it really well.
Your Congolese story is a great one that I encourage people to go check out, looking for it online. Hey, we're out of time. So before we wrap up, I'd like to thank ACG again for putting this together and providing a venue for us to talk about real talk and what I call deal talk. I'd also like to thank Rhythm Superfoods, Cece's Veggie Co., Ponder Foods, and HireBetter for lending us your leaders today. And then, of course, thank you to Scott, Ben, and Mason. Thank you so much for joining us. Your leadership is absolutely necessary out there, and more than ever. So keep up the great work. And to all of you, thank you for joining us. I'll be turning the mic back over to Tyler Davis. He will let you know next steps for the virtual networking portion of today. So Tyler, take it away.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. We really appreciate that. With some stellar information and getting here in the front lines of CEOs. Keep in mind, also thanks to HireBetter's sponsors, Weaver, Dykema, and Insperity, as well as HireBetter. And then a reminder that next Wednesday, June 10th at noon, we are going to have another second CPG investment panel discussion with focusing on the future of CPG investing with Badr Alam of Cavu Ventures, Chris Schonk of ATX Venture Partners, and Scott Collier of Whole Foods Market. So that should be another excellent discussion. And then at this point, we are going to then break out to our networking groups. And Sarah, can you arrange that?
You bet. Give me just a second.
Awesome. And when you are set to the breakout rooms, if you haven't done that before, you'll just need to unmute your screen so that you can be able to